David Weinberg is a lead columnist for the Jerusalem Post and Israel Hayom newspapers. He also serves as the Director of Public Affairs at Bar-Ilan University's Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Centers and has served as Senior Advisor to Deputy Prime Minister Natan Sharansky. Michael?
I have a son who's a officer in Israeli military intelligence, and as he was dressing to leave the house this morning at 6:30, he saw me putting on a tie, asked me where I was going. I told him I was coming to speak before you at this summit, and I told him a little bit about it. And he remembered that I had spoken to a leadership group that Joel and Natasha brought here last year as well. And he said, what's the difference? I'll tell you what the difference is. I said, last year I spoke to a group of outsiders, and this year I'm coming to speak to a group of influential people who are in power, who are in ascendancy, and it feels good. I'm thrilled to be part of your movement and to speak here this year. I salute you, I congratulate you on this summit, and I know that you will influence things in Washington and elsewhere in years to come in wonderful ways. I want to talk to you this afternoon about Israeli grand strategy and how this interfaces with grand strategic changes that are underway in the world. And I want to do so because twice last year I visited Washington, made the rounds of think tanks, Jewish organizations, administration officials, and I found a profound misunderstanding, a misreading of Israel and the changed Middle East. Most of the people I spoke to, particularly in the administration, thought that Prime Minister Netanyahu was just playing petty politics in order to survive without a grand plan. And I tried to explain to them how wrong they were and to articulate a coherent Israeli strategic worldview. Let me give you an example of some of the misperceptions. I found senior Obama administration officials who've convinced themselves that the Israeli security establishment has come around to their view that the JCPOA, the deal signed with Iran 2 years ago, is benign. That Prime Minister Netanyahu is an outlier in this regard. Even the Israeli security establishment has come around to the view, they told me, that the Iran deal has great benefits, and they were very self-congratulatory with smirks on their face. And to prove their claim, they pointed to a series of speeches given last spring, anti-Netanyahu speeches given at the Herzliya conference by Ehud Barak, Bogi Yalon, and others. And I told my American interlocutors that they were deluding themselves. While the deal has been signed, there is nobody serious in the Israeli security establishment who thinks that the deal was anything but a mistake. Yes, there are Israeli security officials that today will emphasize the positives of the deal, but that's like telling the boss a few nice things that you know he wants to hear because you need to keep the relationship going. Simply means you want to keep good relations with him. But in concrete terms, everyone here in Israel knows that American capitulation to Iran has strengthened Tehran's hegemonic ambitions and increased its troublemaking in the region. Don't be fooled by the echo chamber you heard in Herzliya, I told them. That's the usual cutthroat internal Israeli domestic politics. But the consensus in Israel remains that the JCPOA was and remains a wreck. I also found a great deal of apprehension and angst in Washington about Israel's new regional diplomatic maneuvering. What the heck is Netanyahu doing traveling 5 times over the last year and a half to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin? And what's all this talk about Israeli tacit alliances with Sunni states? Do you really believe, they asked me, that Israel can replace the US as its main diplomatic and security anchor with Egyptian dictators or Saudi sheiks or with a Russian dictator? And here too I was forced to explain to my interlocutors in Washington that they were out of sync with Middle Eastern realities and failing to appreciate Israel's strategic worldview. Israel has no intention, I told them, no intention of shifting away from its anchor alliance with the United States. In fact, it needs and wants U.S. engagement in this region more than ever. Alas, it sees the U.S. withdrawing from its commitments globally and to allies in the region, and greasing the path towards dominance of its greatest regional adversary. So Israel is bandwagoning with those who share a common cause, which is preventing Iranian hegemony and tamping down Islamic insurgencies. And that includes Russia, which is flying its air force on our northern border. And while Putin is partnered with Iran at the moment to defend the Assad regime, he respects Israel's role and Israel's security needs in this region and has respected Israel's red lines. And sometimes that's more than can be said for President Obama. So what I'm arguing before you today is that there is an Israeli strategic worldview, there is a grand strategy, and it goes something like this. With the Arab states melting down, and the region in throes of civilizational chaos, and the security architecture in the region unknown and unstable, and it could continue for 10, 50, or even 100 years, with the Palestinians radicalized and unable to think straight about their own strategic interests, making neat territorial deals between us and the Palestinians close to impossible. In a time of uncertainty and fluidity like this, Israel's policy is caution with creativity. And that means, number one, that we navigate cautiously. We ride out the Middle Eastern storms by strictly securing our borders. Number two, we avoid grandiose diplomatic experiments, and we refrain as much as possible from bloody wars. Number three, we ensure domestic government stability, we grow Israel's economy, and we manage the frictions with the Palestinians. We maneuver innovatively. Fourth, we look to create new regional alliances by sharing intelligence capabilities, helping secure others. Look at our new relations in the Eastern Mediterranean with Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, and Egypt. Look at Israel's emerging strong ties with Egypt. Look at Israel's resurging ties with Africa. And with regard to the Palestinians, fifth of all, the truth is that the Palestinian problem has greatly been marginalized as a priority issue for the Arabs in the region. In relative terms, in broader contexts, Palestinian nationalism is one of the more confrontable problems that Israel faces. The frictions can be managed. The point missed in Washington is that it's no longer Israel versus the Palestinians or Israel against the Arabs. It's Israel and most of the Arab nations together against the Iranians and the jihadis. Can you imagine? Last year, Israel gave weapons to an Arab country. Israel granted 18 Cobra helicopters to the Jordanians. That's the new world we're living in. And there are so many other below the table and above the table security assistance projects like this that create new connectivity between Israel and the more moderate regimes in the region. And finally, Israelis overwhelmingly think that Netanyahu is the best man to manage all this. His prudence and his patience is proving smart. And so there is an Israeli grand strategy of sorts that has been misunderstood in Washington. I think perhaps it's an ongoing Israeli mistake that we don't articulate this more clearly. And here we have a new opportunity with President Trump. If I look at the emerging alliance structures, it would appear that President Trump is seeking a new grand strategic deal with Russia, perhaps in alliance against the hegemonic economic ambitions of China. And the question for Israel is going to be where does Iran fit into all this? Can Putin be convinced to downgrade his alliances with the Iranians in order to partner with America and with Israel in confronting jihadism in this region. And I want to conclude by pointing something out, which I haven't seen commented on anywhere in the Israeli or global press. 2 years ago on this day, or on the 18th, the 19th of December, Israeli headlines were screaming big black letters, Black Wednesday they called it. What was Black Wednesday? Black Wednesday was a day in which the entire world seemed to be collapsing in on Israel. On one day, Black Wednesday, in December 2014, the European Parliament proclaimed its support for Palestinian statehood. The parliaments of Luxembourg, Portugal, France, and Sweden had done so in the weeks prior to that. The contracting high parties of the Fourth Geneva Convention gathered in Switzerland to condemn Israel, only the third time they had met since 1949, and each time only to deal with Israel. The European Court removed Hamas from the European list of terrorist organizations. All this happened in more or less 1 week. And the Israeli press called it Black Wednesday. Israel was isolated. And yet, all these international condemnations and threats of isolation have been a permanent feature of Israel's history, and we have survived them. We have survived them all. The UN has repeatedly condemned us. Jews have not been liked for several thousand years. Our collective effort to build a state in this land was not liked much more either. State Department condemned Israel for capturing the Galilee and the Negev in 1948. We were condemned for 1956. We were condemned for our 1967 quote-unquote aggression. Israel was raked over the coals for its annexation of the Golan Heights. It fulminated against Prime Minister Begin when he bombed the Iraqi nuclear reactor, when he bombed Beirut. By the way, the US was party to all these condemnations. When we assassinated the master PLO jihadist Abu Jihad, and I can go down the list of major Israeli security operations, all of which have been condemned by the world. So the hypocrisy of the nations has been a constant in our foreign relations, as have the melodramatic warnings of Israel's deepening isolation. And yet Israel chugs along just fine, thank you. And to a great extent, it's because of friends like you. Thank you.